I'm Kevin from Alliance Calibration. We're going to be talking about balances. This is a balance. Scales, balances, two sides of the same coin. Balances are typically much more accurate devices as opposed to scales, typically a little bit larger, maybe a little less accurate. Balances you'll typically find in a laboratory environment. Scales, kind of everywhere else. This one's pretty accurate. It can measure up to 220 grams to 0.01 milligrams. So a typical weighing example, in this case I'm just going to use some Class F weights, would involve opening the draft shield. That prevents drafts from interfering with your measurement, which you can actually see on the display right now. That's just the air blowing by it. That's how accurate something like this is. And we're just going to take a 20 gram weight, place it here in the center of the pan, close the draft shield, and within a few seconds you'll see that number stabilize out. And at that point we're reading not quite 20 grams. This is a Class F weight, which actually is not accurate enough to calibrate this scale. This scale can actually be used to calibrate that weight. But in this case, it's reading 19.99869 grams, as opposed to the 20, which is stamped on a weight. Number of potential areas where you could experience error in your measurements on a scale stem from a number of different sources. One, not keeping your draft shield closed. Another one is actually due to the fact that we just moved this scale a few minutes ago and it hasn't been plugged in continuously for several hours. Typically you want a balance like this to be plugged in for at least 2 hours before you actually take any measurements with it. But another thing that can happen is that this pan located here can have some slight issues with not being completely parallel. It's only attached at the very center of the pan, so the loading can cause issues depending on where you place it on the scale. And you'll see I get one reading there, and once you stabilize this out, you'll see it's a very different reading back there. So you always want to try to maintain your load as close to the center of the pan as possible to get the most accurate representation. The best way to care for your balances is leave them plugged in a draft-free environment with as minimal vibration as possible. Also want to not have too much dust floating around. There's some electronics in here that are very sensitive and have some very tight tolerances to them. If dust gets in there, it can cause a nightmare. Been there, done that. It costs several $1,000s in repairs. When it comes to balances especially, always leave them plugged in. Keep them away from steep temperature differences. You don't want to use this in your freezer and then turn around and bring it out to your greenhouse in August. Not a good idea. Not going to be good for the equipment. When it comes to scales, on the other hand, they're a lot more rugged. They're really designed to be picked up, moved around. Biggest thing is, don't travel huge differences in elevation. Gravity changes. The column of air sitting on top of us changes with elevation. So if you're taking it up or downstairs, you're going to need to recalibrate your scale. But as long as you're staying on the same level, sort of playing field, you're usually good.